Is that going to cause a revolution in the United States? I mean, people could suddenly start shooting each other over this, potentially. So what do we know about Jewish people? And why in the world does this guy hate them so much that he wants all of them to die? That's what he said when the police arrested him. He said he wanted all Jewish people to die. So what's going on? We talked about this in other classes. You can repeat it if you like. Everybody else doesn't know. What? Anything? You got anything for me?
Still spinning.
It's all spinning around?
But like I said in the last class, I feel it's probably like not probably, but more rebels and stuff.
We know the Russians tried to kill them off. They had what they referred to as pogroms. The Ukrainians disliked them to the extent that they not only killed them, but they stripped them naked and they ran them through the streets in the wintertime. And this is a game that they played. And they played it every, 10 or 15 years. Anytime their economy went bad, they always blamed it on the Jewish people. Of course, the Jewish people weren't allowed to participate completely in their economy. So it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. If somebody lost money, they blamed the Jewish people, even though the Jewish people may not have had anything at all to do with it. So the Russians didn't like them, the Germans didn't like them, the Ukrainians didn't like them, and people in the United States from time to time have blamed Jewish people for lots of different things. Usually it has to do with money, and potentially the reason is because initially in Christianity, Christians weren't allowed to lend people money. They weren't allowed to. It was called usury. And the only people that were allowed to do that were people that weren't Christian. And of course, the only people that weren't Christian were Jewish people. So they lent money to people. And if they paid them back, they paid them back. If they didn't pay them back, or if they didn't have the money to pay them back, a lot of times they just kicked them out of town. I know, that's one way to handle it. Isabel and Ferdinand. You remember Isabel and Ferdinand. In 1492, Columbus sailed this ocean blue. The way they got their money was by kicking the Jewish people out of Spain. They had a fairly large population. They had been allowed to live there for an extended length of time. And then in the 15th century, Isabel and Ferdinand kicked the Jewish people out. And they started the infamous Spanish Inquisition. Well, who were they looking for in the Spanish Inquisition? They were looking for Jewish people that claimed that they converted to Christianity. The only way you could stay in Spain was to convert to Christianity. They were looking for Jewish people that hadn't actually converted. That's what the Spanish Inquisition was all about. Eventually, of course, it became a lot worse than just looking for Jewish people because most of the Jewish people were gone by that time. But eventually, and it lasted into the 20th century, the Spanish Inquisition did. So you guys can, if you want to be pissed off at somebody, the people you should be pissed off at are Isabel and Ferdinand, because they kicked the Jewish people out. That's how they got the money to give to Columbus to sail the ocean blue in 1492. There you go. I know. So it's their fault. So is it the Jewish people's fault that Columbus discovered America? Is it? Not really. It's their money. It was their money, but it was stolen money by the Spanish government. As confusing as all that is. Okay.
How did they get money from kicking the Jewish out?
How did they get money?
Yeah.
They didn't let them take anything with them. Oh, so here we have all these Spanish people, or we have all these Jewish people that are lending money to the Spanish people. And sometimes they pay it back, sometimes they don't. And of course they charge them interest, which is usury, of course. And when they kicked them out, they confiscated all their land, they confiscated all their money. And that gave them all this free money.
So people today are probably scared that the Jewish people will do that again, like they'll overtake or grow in numbers, and I guess.
Oh, what do they represent? 1.3% of the U.S. population? Are you scared of them? There's more Indians than there are Jewish people. Are you still scared of them?
Well, I'm not, but
Okay.
I wonder why other people
I don't know. I know. People are afraid of these people. Jews will not replace us. That's what the neo-Nazis were chanting at Charlottesville. Jews will not replace us. Who are they afraid that they would replace them with? Do Jewish people make that many babies? Are they popping out puppies every 10 or every year? One a year? Is that the way it works? Are they that fecund? Fecund means they have a lot of babies. I know. It's one of those cool words that nobody's ever heard before. It sounds dirty. It is kind of dirty. It means that you're fertile. No, they don't. It's not that they have so many children. It's the idea. The idea was that they were going to bring immigrants into the United States to replace the loyal, good white guys. The white supremacists. All these nice, really good white people. That was the idea. I'm white, and I don't follow that principle. I think that's kind of silly, but that's what they were saying, and that's what they were meaning. Those wonderful people that were trying to convince white people to rise up and wait a minute, they're already in charge. Who are they going to rise up against? I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, okay, so we're going to talk about the Jewish faith. We're going to talk about Protestants in the next chapter. This is just something that's going on right now. Trump has gone to Pittsburgh to grieve, theoretically, with the people that lost their elders. So this is in the news right now, and if you don't understand the whole Jewish argument, then none of this makes sense. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that Jewish people are trying to control the government, they control all the money in the United States, they control all the money in the world. There's this really odd conspiracy theory out there that all these guys are banding together and they're just waiting until they can take over everything. They represent a very small percentage of people. Anyway, I think it's important that you understand what these guys are talking about. And of course, I'm not explaining it like if somebody were a white supremacist, they would explain it differently, and they would tell you about how dangerous these people are, which is the reason the guy went in there and shot the place up. He only targeted really old people, which seems very odd, or unless you understand that there were only very old people in the synagogue. So he was targeting the people that were in there. It was a Jewish holiday. It was Shabbat, and it was relatively early in the morning. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. So they were the only ones that were in there, and that's why he targeted them. So how important is this? I mean, this is kind of history happening right now, but we have to go back and look at what happened before. Like the Nazis tried to exterminate all the Jewish people, genocide, killed 6 million of them. Jewish people living in Eastern Europe and Western Europe actually killed all the Jews in Germany, killed most of the Jews in France. Interestingly, Mussolini was a fascist, just like Hitler was a fascist, and Mussolini wouldn't release his Jews to Hitler. But remember, the Italians, they capitulated, they surrendered in 1943. And at that point, he tried to round up as many Jews as he could, but the Italians protected their Jewish population. So there's a lot of people that don't agree with this idea that they're the bad guys and that they should be exterminated. A lot of people that don't agree with that.
When you say why a lot of people hate Jews or dislike Jews, I think one of the things you probably pointed out, but I think this is probably where they go against a lot of people's culture and ways of living as probably one of the ways of agree with the Jews.
Yeah, they don't eat bacon.
Yeah, eating that.
How can you tell somebody that doesn't eat bacon, right? Well, be careful because Muslims don't eat bacon either. I like bacon myself, but I'm not Jewish. Obviously, I eat bacon, so I can't possibly. And I like pork chops too. But I only like pork chops if you put the right stuff on it. You gotta put salt and pepper on it, pork chops, and you gotta cook it all the way through. Or I don't trust pork that's not cooked all the way through. Anyway, that's a good point. They have a different culture, and they have things have to be kosher. They have kosher pickles. They have kosher everything. I mean, anything has to be blessed by the rabbi. They can't eat. The Old Testament is actually the Jewish Bible. It's the Torah. So all of this stuff is, their culture is not the same. But then again, your culture is not the same either. Yeah, I noticed that. Somebody was telling me that you're not supposed to throw your hair away. When you comb your hair, you have to pick it out with a brush and save it. I know. You didn't know that? Oh my God. Is that right? See? Ask Travis. He knows everything. Go ahead. Tell him. I had never heard that before, and I heard that today, and I was a little shocked. Okay, so yeah, their culture is not the same as the Western culture. Well, they have adapted to the United States, of course. So, and not only that, but their religion is a little bit different than Christian religion. In that, in Christian religion, you have to believe the way that everybody else believes, that the church believes. But in Judaism, you don't have to believe everything that the Jewish faith believes. You just have to practice. You have to be a good practicing Jew in order to. The Jewish people consider themselves the chosen people by God, and it's the same God. It's the same God as the Christian God. Okay, does that make sense? I know. Let's talk religion. Let's argue religion today. Let's have a debate. Okay, last time we talked about the Latin American culture. Latin American culture recognizes something called simpatico. It's harmonious relationships, emotional expressive displays of graciousness, hospitality, and harmony, personal harmony. So that's what they're looking for. It allows them to be able to be around other people without shooting somebody, which is very important. Simpatico. Latin Americans view their self-concepts to be more characterized by traits that reflect simpatico, such as easygoing, respectful, courteous, and agreeable. That's the way. And if you've ever been around Hispanics, they are fairly easygoing. They're relatively respectful. They're very courteous, and they're relatively agreeable. I would say that. I used to play on a Mexican-based softball team when I was stationed in Lubbock, Texas. And those guys were really, really sweet. They were really, really nice. Except when they gave me those hot peppers, and they didn't warn me. And, I told you about this. The guy's wife came over and slapped him for giving me a hot pepper because it blistered my tongue. But at the time I had 2 kids and I wasn't married. They were always trying to find me a wife, which was kind of nice. They never did find me a wife. But they always took care of my kids. They were really, really nice people. Just the sweetest people in the whole wide world. Latin Americans also expect interactions with others to be dominated by positive and social behaviors and to have fewer negative social behaviors compared with the expectations of European Americans. One of the interesting things was they always came together. They always came in a group. So it's almost like a caravan. Did I say the word caravan? It was a caravan. They always came from wherever they lived, which was on the other side of Lubbock, to the ball fields, and they always came in a caravan, which was kind of cool. And of course, if somebody's car broke down, then they would just let this guy. this guy jump in with them. You know, it was really kind of cool. And they thought this was the weird part. They wanted, so here I was with me and my 2 kids in my car, and they said, well, you shouldn't drive alone. And I said, well, I got my kids. They said, no, you shouldn't drive alone. And they kept trying to put somebody in my car so that so what am I going to do? I'm going to drive back to the base and then bring him back to Lubbock? I mean, what was I supposed to do? Of course, sometimes it was young ladies, but that was, I never did that. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. For one thing, only a couple of them spoke English, and my Spanish is really, really bad. So I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting myself into anytime somebody tried to get into my car. Latin Americans show a clear preference for working in groups in which people strive to maintain a warm and hospitable atmosphere. European Americans, especially Protestants, show a clear preference for staying focused on the task at hand. And of course, this was the difference between me and somebody else, on the softball team. I was always thinking about my batting average. I was always coaching third base. They were always in the dugout, slapping hands and whatnot. It was really kind of interesting. They were a really close group, and because of that, the Anglos that lived in Lubbock that played softball against us, they didn't like us at all. And so after that team stopped playing, I was still there, and I was still available for a team. And nobody wanted me on their team because I had played on this Mexican softball team, which was kind of interesting. So I played on the base team instead. We used to kick butt, and they used to. Some of the things they yelled at these guys, you wouldn't believe it. Has anybody else had any experience with Hispanics? Any positive experience? I don't want to hear about a knife fight that you had in 1978 or something. Has anybody had any positive experiences? Okay. Well, it's just one softball team. It's just one group. Of course, in the service, you run into everybody. I mean, just about anybody. I had a lot of friends when I was in the service who were Hispanic, and they were very much like this. Latin Americans act in most sociable ways, more sociable ways than the European Americans, and time sampling studies find that they spend a greater proportion of their time socializing with others. This is one of the things, this is the reason I coach third base, okay? The reason I coach third base is because they wanted to stay in the dugout and talk to each other, they wanted to make fun of each other, they were having a good time, and I was like the only guy that was willing to go out and coach third base. First base was kind of interesting. First base was right next to our dugout, so if you coached third base, then you went all the way across the diamond, and the only time you talked to anybody was either the third baseman that you're not supposed to talk to, or you were talking to the guy that was on third base. So I didn't have a whole lot of people to talk to, and they thought that was just horrible. If I didn't go out and coach third base, nobody did, because they didn't want to be that far away from their friends. And maybe it had to do with a safety issue, because there were a lot of people in Lubbock who didn't like people that spoke Spanish. They were, no, how strange was that? Well, they didn't like me because I played ball with a group of people that spoke Spanish. But like I said, I wasn't off of the team for very long. Humans require such an extended period of costly protective care and socialization that they fare best when they have two parents devoted to providing resources and socializing them. And this is one of the reasons why we talk about the nuclear family so much. Mom, dad, and then the kids. These kids are the ones that are more likely to survive. People from a single parent family are less likely to survive than people from a dual parent family. Of course, I was a single parent for a number of years, for about 5 years. My first wife left when my baby was 9 months old. So I had a baby and a 2.5-year-old. Oh, what's wrong with that lady? There you go. That's why I'm a psychologist. I was trying to figure out what was wrong with that crazy lady. What do you think was wrong with the crazy lady? Why did she abandon her children? Why did she abandon somebody that is so sweet, just like me? I mean, it was me. Okay, maybe it had something to do with me. In the ancestral environment, it was likely that the parents who did not feel... I heard you back there, Edison, talking. It wasn't me, okay? It must have been her. In the ancestral environment, it was likely that the parents who did not feel especially strong love for their children were less likely to have their children survive the tenuous circumstance of a subsistence lifestyle. And we can talk about humans all day long, and the reality that somebody will survive or not survive if they don't have a loving parent. But let me use an example that we saw up in Montana that had to do with cows. I had a student who raised cows, and he had they were Herefords. He had a branch of Herefords, and what he discovered was, what he did was he would breed the Herefords that stayed with their calves, that were always around their calves. The ones, the females, the cows, the heifers that didn't spend a lot of time around their calves, they wouldn't allow them to breed. So he bred a whole herd of cows that really took care of their calves. Before he was losing, 30% of his calves. He was losing to coyotes. He was losing them to the weather. He was losing them for really strange reasons. But then after he started selective breeding of the really good mothering heifers, the number of losses that he had went down to single digits. So he was losing 30% of his calves before. Now all of a sudden he's losing 7%. And usually it had to do with disease. It didn't have to do with coyotes weren't getting to them anymore because the cows would protect them. Really kind of interesting. So he bred this group of cows that were very motherly. And because of that, people started noticing this, and they started buying his Herefords because they were good mothering cows. Not all cows are good mothering cows. Not all horses are good mothering horses. I had a cat that wouldn't take care of her kittens, and all of her kittens always died because she was such a bad mother, as odd as that may seem. So, I mean, you find these creatures out, and there are humans that are exactly the same way. And if there's nobody to take care of the kids, what happens to the kids? Exactly. So this is one of the things that we have noticed, that if you've got two parents, you have two choices or two chances for the child to have a good loving relationship. In my case, of course, I already told you that I took care of both of my kids. I still call my kids my babies, even though one of them is 50 and the other one's 46. Or not quite 46. One's 46, the other's 49. But they're still my babies. But I took care of them, and I had to become both mother and father for those 5 years. They were just little guys, so I had to do everything. I had to cook, and I wasn't a very good cook. I'm still not a very good cook. My poor son almost starved to death, the poor kid, and he's a chef today because he wanted to learn what good tasting food was all about. Really kind of a tragedy, I guess. Okay, so we can have, and I think potentially, knowing my first wife's family, she may have selectively picked me because I'm so sexy. No, that's not it. She picked me because she knew I was a good parent. And she wasn't looking for, she didn't want to co-parent with me. She wanted to take off after begatting children. She just wanted to take off. So she knew the kids would probably survive with a good parent. I mean, a lot of guys won't take care of their kids. A lot of guys won't even wash the dishes, right? You can't even get them to wash the clothes. But here, yeah, all of a sudden, I'm everybody. You know, I'm the cook. I'm the person that has to wash the dishes. I have to wash the floors. I have to sweep the floors. You know, I'm that guy. And so she knew that I was that kind of a person. So potentially, that's the reason that she selected me. Not because I'm such a good-looking fella, or that I'm so tall. I know that's not it. It had to have been, it could have been that she had that in mind, because her family had a history of this. But I didn't realize this until after I married her, that her family had a history of abandoning their children, and it went back 3 or 4 generations from her family, from her cohort. And of all of her sisters, she had 3 sisters. There were 4 girls in her family. All of them abandoned their children. All 4 of them did. And her mother, she had a sister, and her sister abandoned 6 children to run off with a painter. He was painting the house, and she ran off with him. I know. And this goes back, way, way back. The grandmother her grandmother had abandoned 2 children to marry the guy that she eventually ended up with. So, you know, it went back in time. So potentially she understood this. Potentially she knew that she was going to take off, and that she wanted somebody who could take care of the kids. Otherwise, what would have happened to the kids? Well, nobody in her family was going to take care of them. They didn't even take care of their own kids. So maybe that's why she selected me. Not because I'm such a good-looking fella. And I saw you laughing, Sharon. That's so mean.
So, if that happened, like after they left, did they have any more kids?
No. They had a pile of kids, and then they took off and they ran off with, you know, the drummer of some band or something. You know, they became groupies for some country and western group or something. Oh, just horrible stuff. I could tell you stories about my ex-wife and which guys she ran off with. She took off with, she was married like 4 times after she left me. Never had any more kids, but she was a groupie for a group called Golden Earring. Radar Love. So if you ever want to listen to Radar Love, these guys were from Sweden or something, or Holland. Anyway, so she was a groupie with that group of people. Another group that another group that she was a groupie with was, wait a minute, the one with a really ugly guy with a big mouth. Tyler. His name's Tyler. Steven Tyler. Aerosmith. And I don't know if she was ever with Tyler, but she was with the drummer of that group. He's the lead guy. No. I've never told anybody that. So every time I hear Golden Earring, it just pisses me off. Radar Love. Some strong incentives were needed to keep parents together so they would both remain to support the children. Of course, this is what they were looking for. We've got these neurotransmitters in our system that makes us want to take care of our children. And the neurotransmitter is a substance called oxytocin. So we thought, and we know this happens with other animals, we can give them a shot of oxytocin and they start nesting and they start building a place to raise their children even if they're not pregnant. We know that this occurs, but this occurs with humans as well. As soon as oxytocin has to do with breastfeeding, it has to do with labor, it also has to do with nesting. So we know that humans have this desire, and females have more oxytocin than males do, and males may not have hardly any at all, but females certainly have it. So the idea is that this is what we were looking for. This is what we have been seeking. How in the world do we make sure that our children survive? According to the reasoning, romantic love was selected as the glue that keeps couples together. So it had to be something, and here we have society, and some kids are surviving, and some kids aren't surviving. So we had to find something to bring people together, and that one thing became romantic love. And if you read literature, if you're a reader, than potentially, or a movie watcher. There's a lot of romance in movies. This is romantic love that society has created as a glue to keep people together. I mean, otherwise we just kind of throw two people together. They make babies, and the guy goes to work and brings the money home, and his wife takes care of the kids, and they don't really like each other a whole lot. Wait a minute, this sounds like the 1950s, doesn't it? 1950s United States. Before in the United States, we couldn't get a divorce. Divorce was illegal in almost every state in the Union except for Nevada until the 1960s. And then the 1960s and 1970s, all the divorce laws became far more liberal all around the United States. So now you can get a divorce in any state. You don't have to go to Nevada. Oh, what a mess you made. You don't have to go to Nevada to get a divorce. But if you watch a movie from the 1930s or 1940s, and somebody is looking for a divorce, they always have to go to Nevada. And they go to one of those ranches. They had to live there for 3 months before they could become a citizen of that state, of the state of Nevada. And then they could get a divorce. So people were going to Nevada to get a divorce, as interesting as that was. Or they were going down to Mexico to get a divorce. So people would, if you read the biography of Rita Hayworth, she went down to Mexico 3 or 4 times to get divorces from some of her husbands. She had a whole pile of them. I think she was married, wasn't she married to Mickey Rooney? She was married to Orson Welles. She's married to a lot of different guys. Anyway, she would go down to Mexico. But then again, she was Mexican. As it turns out, she was actually Mexican. According to the reasoning, okay, we already talked about that. Those people who did not develop feelings of love for their partners would have been less likely to stay with them and would have ended up having fewer surviving offspring than those who felt strong feelings of love. So this is what we're looking for, is this desire to raise your children. One review of ethnographies of 166 cultures found that clear evidence of romantic love in 89%. So this exists all over the world. This concept that men and women are different and they fall in love and they want to stay together. This idea of romantic love in 89% of 66 cultures. Is that right? Yeah. Historically, the majority of marriages around the world have been arranged by families rather than by the couples themselves. Arranged marriages. And this is the way it was in England, this is the way it was in France, this is the way it was in Germany for an extended length of time. But we also had soldiers wandering around making babies. Soldiers tend to do that when they've been away from their significant others or insignificant others. They get a little bored, and they're fighting, and of course it raises passions, and they leave children behind. So arranged marriages were very common. Looking at 186 societies, researchers found that Western strategies in finding an appropriate spouse was only seen among 31% of the men and 8% of the women. So women, seems kind of weird, doesn't it? So who's the one that supports? I mean, if you go to a chick flick, you're probably going to see some romance in it, aren't you? If you watch a movie that guys like to watch, how much romance is there? A lot of killing, but there's hardly any romance whatsoever. But this is the weird part. 31% of the men were looking for the Western type of romance. Only 8% of women. It gets better. So we may be seeing the wrong people as the individuals that are looking for love. Maybe it's the guys that are looking for love, not the females. In a study by Levine, Sato, Hashimoto, Verma in 1995, college students from several different countries were asked this question: if a man or a woman, whichever you are, had all the qualities you desired, would you marry this person if you were not in love with that individual? Would you marry somebody that you weren't in love with? If they had all the qualities that you were looking for, would you marry them? Or does it have to be for love? You're not in love with this person, but they have everything that you've ever wanted in a spouse. Would you marry them? Would you marry them? It's the perfect person. Would you marry him? You're not in love with them, but they're the perfect person. No? Okay. You would? There you go. Would you marry him? They've got everything you've ever wanted. Anything that you've ever wanted. I don't know what you want. Maybe you want money. Maybe you want a nice pickup truck. I don't know. They've got everything that you've ever wanted. Would you marry him? Yes? You can get a divorce anytime you want. So I've got 3 yeses and 1 no. Yes. Would you marry him? Of course you would. Of course you would. Would you marry him? Of course. They've got everything you've ever wanted except, love, passion. Okay. Wow. I just watched the movie last night. The guy didn't marry the lady. Oh, wait a minute. It was The Wedding Planner. Have you ever seen The Wedding Planner? Great movie. Yeah. Jennifer Lopez. Geez, I'm chasing Jennifer Lopez myself. That other lady was, well, she was just flat to me. Yeah. Yeah. You would? Yeah. Would you marry him? No, I got another no. Yes, okay. I've got like 3 no's in the classroom. This is tragic.
Who said no?
Edison said no. He wouldn't marry him. He's here. He's here for love. Of course. You're here for love, right? There you go.
Money doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Isn't that something that was on the internet? I think it was this morning or yesterday. In these countries, I think it's either Japan or China. One of the princesses gave up their titles in order to have love. And she basically let go of everything that she wrote.
She did, and she married a commoner. I know. She had to give up the throne. She had to give up everything.
She gave up money.
Yeah, lots of money. I mean, like all the money you can imagine. And now she's going to be living on a fixed income.
She's going to regret that.
Well, I've been married 3 times. I count. I've been married 3 times. And I'm happy that I'm married to my current wife. My first wife was, well, she was pregnant.
Did you marry her?
And of course I did. This is back in the 60s. Of course I did. The second one looked like a Playboy bunny. Ooh. But I only stayed married to her for 5 months. My current wife does not look like a Playboy bunny. But, I don't know. I married for love. The 3rd time I married for love.
Are you still with her?
Yeah, 40 years later. 40 years later, I'm still with her. I know. So I agree with Travis and Edison.
How old were you when you first got married?
19.
When did you get married?
In 1969.
How old were you?
How old am I
No,
now?
how old were you when you first got married?
19.
Oh, 19.
Yeah.
That's when you stopped getting married. When did you stop getting married?
The last time I got married, I was
How old were you the last time you got
29.
married?
29. Finally figured it out. You never marry for lust. Worst thing in the world. Over 80% of Americans, Britons, Australians, and Latin Americans said they would not marry for the perfect person. They would not marry the perfect person. And only a small percentage, less than 5% of these countries said that they would. 5% of the people said that they would. However, almost everybody in this classroom said they would. I know. Different culture. Yes. So arranged marriages, I mean, you guys had arranged marriages until when? Well, are there still some arranged marriages? Yeah. So maybe that's the reason why. People have told me that their parents had arranged marriages.
I think those people are lasting longer.
Those marriages are lasting longer? Well, you know, yeah, I guess. And how acceptable is divorce on the reservation? Is it acceptable?
I guess it's acceptable now.
Wow, okay.
It's a generation thing.
Okay. Okay, here's the kicker. And the identical question was posed to American college students in 1967. Why is 1967 important? 1967 is important, Monique, because I was graduated from high school in 1967. I was married in 1969. Okay.
So you enlisted, right?
I enlisted in
enlist
1971.
Did you enlist right after high school?
Right out of college.
Right after.
Right out of college. Okay.
Did you get married because you were going to enlist?
No, I got married because I already told you why I got married.
Yeah, good.
She was pregnant. Well, we were engaged. Okay, I didn't impregnate her until she was engaged. That sounds like, you know, selective breeding or something.
How long were you enlisted?
How long was I in the service?
Yeah.
12 years. 1971 to
Did you
1983.
only stick with one branch?
I'm sorry?
Did you only stick with one branch?
Yeah, I just think it's the Air Force. It's the easiest one. Okay. I'm kind of lazy. This is how stupid I am. Okay, in 1971, when I joined the service, we were still losing a number of people in Vietnam. So I got smart and I said, well, I'll join the Air Force. The ground war ended in 1972. And they started what they called the Air War. The infamous Air War started in 1972. So we lost almost all of our planes between 1972 and 1973. During linebacker 1, linebacker 2, all these really strange things. So here I am, the smart guy that I am. Instead of joining the Army when the ground war was declining, I joined the Air Force when the Air War was increasing. That's how smart I am. Anyway, and my job was to, if a pilot got shot down and we thought that he was still alive, my job was to fly out and pick him up. Or fly into the jungle and pick him up. That was our job. What a horrible job that was. You can imagine. So sometimes what they would do, he had to flip a switch. And that told us that he was still alive. So sometimes the Vietnamese or the Viet Cong or the bad guys they'd flip that switch. He was dead, or they killed him, or they captured him and took him away. Then they flipped that switch, so then they got a whole helicopter crew. Yeah, I know, that's how dumb we were. What a horrible job that was, as you can imagine. And half the time you can't see to the ground anyway. I mean, it was a jungle, so there was a canopy. Not important. It was real green, okay? The greenest place I've ever been. Okay, so this is in 1967, the year I graduated from high school. 65% of the men, but only 24% of the women said that they would not marry someone that they did not love. So here we have, and we've seen this before, haven't we? The women are less, they care less about romance than men do. Men seem to care more about romance to the point of 65% to 24%. That's almost 1/3. It's 2.5. 2.5 times more men care about love than women do. It's right there. See it? You don't see it?
You probably just came up with those numbers.
Wait a minute, wait. We saw the other figure. Where was it? Where were we looking at women before? Half of the students from Pakistan and India, that's not good. We don't care about that. Here it is. 31% compared to 8%. 8% of women cared about romance. 31% of men cared about romance.
Why do you think that is?
I'm sorry?
Why do you think that is?
I have no idea. I don't know. This is backwards. This is really backwards. maybe that's the reason you watch all these really sappy movies about romance, because the men really feel this way, and you want to feel this way.
We know it only happens in movies.
Yeah,
Because they still get romance enough to. Maybe women are more romantic to men now?
No, men are more romantic. It says right there. Okay. I'm going to show you a picture of Donald Trump.
They're more romantic because they get in trouble more often.
You do get in trouble a lot more often, that's for sure. Okay, I'm going to show you a picture of Donald Trump. This is not his current wife, by the way. Donald Trump and I have both been married 3 times. I'm not exactly sure why he got married, but I know why I got married. Anyway, this is his second wife. That's Marla Maples. His first wife was Ivana. Ivana, that's right. Yeah, and they had a baby named Ivanka. The baby is named Ivanka. The likelihood of a culture favoring arranged marriage is not determined randomly. It appears to relate to the dominant kind of family structure in the culture. So the more individualistic a country, the more likely that they will not favor arranged marriages. The more collectivistic, the more arranged marriages make sense to them. Good in 1959 proposed that romantic love would become more important in cultures as the strength of the extended family ties became weaker. Extended family. So extended family has a ton to do with this. So the stronger the extended family, the more likely an arranged marriage makes sense. The weaker the extended family, the more likely that romantic love will be the criteria used to select your mate. The powerful feelings of romantic love could be somewhat irrelevant or even problematic for marriages and cultures with strong extended family ties. So if your family wants you to marry somebody else and you fall in love with the wrong person, wait a minute, what did I watch last night? I watched Bridget Jones last night. She fell in love with the wrong guy. Okay. But the extended family, the stronger the extended family, the more likely it's going to screw things up. Romance is going to screw things up. Because what's the probability you're going to look at that person and say, that's the person I want to marry? Wow, this is the first time I've ever seen her and I want to marry her. That happens? Love at first sight? Do I have any love at first sight people in here? Anybody? Not me. No. I had to figure it out.
When I look in the mirror.
The Western ideal of romantic love, characterized by intense feelings and mutual absorption, could be disrupted in cultures with large kin networks because such feelings can interfere with people's abilities to respect the wishes of their family members. In other words, the stronger your clan system, the stronger your extended family system, the more likely that arranged marriages are going to make sense. The less likely that romantic love will make sense. Do you understand how this is working here? Now the biggest problem is the larger your extended family, the more likely that you're going to, when you have a child, somebody's going to come and help you. If it's a nuclear family, this is one of the problems that we've had in the United States, where we have romantic love, there's nobody around to help take care of the baby. But in really strong extended family situations, there's all kinds of aunts and grandmothers and everybody comes over to help take care of the baby. Okay, so romantic love is less important in those situations. But the probability of, and we need a strong connection between the man and the woman in order for both of them to want to take care of the baby. So there's trade-offs. The larger the kinship, the larger the clanship structure, the more likely that arranged marriages will be the way that spouses are chosen. An analysis of data from 117 non-industrialized societies found clear support for Good's hypothesis. Marriages based on love were more likely in cultures with nuclear family structures than they were in cultures with extended families. And of course, if you go to China, this is what you see. If you go to Pakistan and Afghanistan and Bangladesh and India, this is what you see. You see large extended families. One of the things you do not see is strong nuclear families. But in the United States, in England, in Canada, in Australia, you see strong nuclear families. Any place where you have family units that are living very close to each other. So you've got grandma that lives here, and you've got all the kids live on the same street, in a different house, of course. When you see those kinds of structures, then arranged marriages make a lot more sense. And you have a lot more interaction between the older generation and the newer generation. Now, one of the interesting things about the Jewish faith is that they have been forced to live in units like that. They have been forced to live together. This is the whole concept. The word ghetto comes from the Jewish ghettos of the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and 20th centuries, of course. The whole concept of ghettos, where this group of individuals, because they were Jewish or because they were Irish or because they were Polish, they had to live in the same community. They couldn't live outside the community. It's the idea of reservations. The idea was that if you were from this tribe, you couldn't leave. You had to stay there. So you lived with your relatives. You lived with all of your relatives. And in your culture, the male comes to the female's house. Isn't that the way it works? Okay. In the buffalo hunting cultures, the people up north, the people that live on the Great Plains and they hunted buffalo, it was the other way around. The female went to the male's house. And then she wasn't supposed to have contact with her birth family. That's the way it worked. She became a member of that family. And a lot of times she wasn't a member of that tribe. A lot of times she was a member of another tribe, and they would, which is different from your culture. Completely different from your culture. But they needed people to process buffalo hides. They need people to process the meat. So guys would marry 3 and 4 women. I guess 4 was the maximum number in all the tribes up north. Many arranged marriages start out with no feelings of love between the couple. However, in time, the husband and wife begin to develop strong feelings for one another. A good example of what I'm talking about buffalo hunting cultures. The Comanche were buffalo hunters, and Quanah Parker, the last big chief of the Comanche tribe, had 4 wives. And when he surrendered, he was the last war chief of the Comanche. When he surrendered, of course, the churches came in. They tried to Christianize Quanah, but he wouldn't give up his 4 wives. Everything else, he learned English. Well, he knew English anyway, but he accepted everything except he wouldn't give up his 4 wives. And he said, "Well, what do you want? Which you pick? You pick." I can't pick a wife and just throw the other 3 out. So he built them 4 different houses. He was a relatively wealthy individual. He built 4 houses and maintained his 4 wives in a singular house, which is kind of interesting. One part, buffalo hunting. Some guys from the east. Okay, what are we talking about? Husbands and wives. A good analogy is getting a pet and developing a strong feeling for the animal the longer that you have it. I don't know if you guys, it's just a puppy. Look how much he loves this puppy. It's just a tiny little puppy. People in arranged marriages describe their experiences in a similar manner. The individual approaches a person as his or her new spouse with the expectation of eventually falling in love. With time, they usually do, to some extent. And of course, that's what happens in an arranged marriage. If you watch Big Bang, do I have any people that watch Big Bang? Roger's getting married. We're all excited about it. It's an arranged marriage. Yeah, it's an arranged situation. I know, that's really weird. But we'll see what happens. With the abysmal failure rate of Western marriages, the assumption that arranged marriages are miserable is probably inaccurate. I mean, we can't conceive of somebody just telling us that we have to marry that person and then being happy with that person for the rest of our lives. But if we talk to the people that have been in arranged marriages, they're fine. They don't have a problem with it at all. Most people in countries where arranged marriages are prevalent view arranged marriages as more likely to succeed than romantic marriages. And you really can't argue with that, because in the United States our divorce rate is over 50%. I know. And I've been divorced twice. So I fit that whole statistic, I guess. Okay. A survey among adults living in various urban centers in India found that 74% of the men and women believed that arranged marriages were more likely to succeed than love marriages. And this is in a country where arranged marriages are very common. 74% of the men and women considered it more likely that these people will stay together. There is also evidence that those in arranged marriages are at least as satisfied with their marriages as those in love marriages. Turkish couples in arranged marriages have been found to be as much in love with their partners as couples in love marriages. And this is a statistic from 1999 by Portascu, which is not a Turkish name. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's a Turkish name. I was thinking it was Armenian. It's not. Okay. Members of the Unification Church, and of course the Unification Church disbanded about 2003 or 2004. But for the longest time, Sung Myung Moon came over to the United States, and he was putting these auditorium full of marrying people together, as weird as that seems. So the woman would come in her wedding dress, and the man would come in his tuxedo, and they would match them up as they got there. And since they were blessed by the heavenly man, which was Sung Myung Moon, and his heavenly wife, and I can't remember her name, but it was his wife, because they were blessed. She's the one who picked the female to go with the male, and he's the one who picked the male to go with. It was very weird. So the two of them would stand there and they would match people up. But it was heavenly, because he was the heavenly man and she was the heavenly woman. Anyway.
Those marriages lasted.
Well, that's what we're going to find out. Members of the Unification Church participated in mass arranged marriages where partners were chosen in ceremonies that involved thousands of men and women. As you can see, this is a picture from one of those marriages, one of those wedding ceremonies. Looking at marriages after 3 years, researchers found a similar rate of satisfaction between these couples and the general public. So they were as happy as anybody else was. And of course, this is in 1986 when this was really huge in the United States. Men in Japanese arranged marriages were found to be more satisfied than those in love marriages. And this is research from 1967. So the Japanese, the men are really happy. Just wait, it gets better. In Chinese marriages, what they discovered was that the men were just as satisfied as the men in love marriages. So in China and Japan, arranged marriages, the men are just as happy as clams. However, women in Japanese arranged marriages were found to be less satisfied in arranged marriages than in love marriages. So the women weren't happy. The men were giddy. They were fine, but the women were not happy at all. Same thing happened in China. The women were not happy. So what are we discovering here? This is really kind of, men are more romantic than women. Isn't that what we just discovered? And in arranged marriages, the men are just fine. We won't say why. But the women are not so fine. They're not so happy. And this is really interesting. And
Maybe in reality, the woman's not going to choose that man. It's not her type.
What if men just settle and women want more?
Yep.
Men settle and women want more.
Yeah.
Wow, I guess we are more romantic than they are. We're a lot more romantic than they are. This is terrible. Write all this stuff down. I think you're typing all this out, right? Okay. And here's the reason why. This suggests that the costs of arranged marriages are borne largely by women in the Japanese and Chinese cultures. It's a very male-dominated society, both in Japan and in China. The woman does almost everything. And in arranged marriages, of course, she doesn't have anything to fall back on. Maybe he doesn't even like her. All he wants, well, you all know what the men want, and as long as they get that, then everybody's happy. I mean, he's happy, that's what I mean. She's not happy, because that may not be what she wants. Not only that, she has to do all the work. And it's a very male-dominated society, both Japan and China. So now we got a problem. A study by Gupta and Singh in 1982 compared marital satisfaction between Indian couples in arranged and love marriages. In the initial years of marriage, those in love marriages professed more love than those in arranged marriages. Over time, it was those in arranged marriages who reported having the most love. Whew. Okay. So the love dies in love marriages, and the love grows in arranged marriages. That's what that says. That's what that means. Okay. This pattern held true for both men and women. The study was replicated with similar results in 1996 and 1988. So we see exactly the same thing. Love grows in arranged marriages. Love dies in love marriages. This is the author of your textbook. This is Heine. I can't remember his first name, but that's him right there. I found a picture of him. I know, I'm so excited. While these results may seem counterintuitive, Heine explains them using an interview with a Japanese colleague who had been in an arranged marriage for 30 years. And this is why arranged marriages work out so well. When they were first married, they had no love for each other. That's what the guy said. We had no love for each other. Now that they have some love for each other, some love seems quite a bit compared to no love. So it's gone from 0 to a lot. And if you know anything about mathematics, anything, it's like infinite, isn't it? If you divide 0 into anything, it's infinite. The answer is infinite. So any love at all is more than you can possibly imagine as far as the arranged marriage is concerned. Couples in love marriages typically start out with a lot of love for each other, maybe an infinite amount of love. Years later, it is not surprising that many of them report having less love than they did during their steamy courtship. Some love doesn't seem so great compared to the lot of love that they had for each other earlier. So they've gone down, and it has died. And there you go. That's the reason that arranged marriages, people feel like it's a much better situation. Of course, that's 15 or 20 years down the road, strangely. And this was also a Japanese guy talking to a Canadian. Heine's actually from British Columbia. In a study in Israel, comparing arranged and love marriages, found similar results. Those in arranged marriages were found to be as much in love with their partners as couples in love marriages. And it has to do with how much did we have before. Of course, if you fall in love with somebody and decide that you have to marry them, you've got lots and lots of love, otherwise you wouldn't marry them. And then as time goes by, the amount of love that you have is less. But in an arranged marriage, you have none. None whatsoever. There's nothing going on between the two. You may not even have seen each other before. So you've got 0 love at the beginning, and now you've got at least some after a period of time. Potentially has something to do with the children that you've created together. There's a really interesting movie called, what is that movie called? It's about an Indian woman marrying an Indian man. This is in India, not in the United States. And their life together. And of course, in the beginning, they didn't even know each other. Literally, they didn't know each other. And they got married. They weren't exactly sure how sex was supposed to work. Eventually they figured it out, and eventually they had a child. Eventually they had another child. He was working all the time. But when he got sick, this was 20 or 30 years down the road. She really missed it. She really wished that he were not there. Of course, he died of a heart attack. Eventually. What was that movie called? Oh, it's a really neat movie. I just saw it the other night. Maybe I watched too many movies. Maybe I shouldn't have watched Bridget Jones last night. But just to be, just so that I can finish my thought, she did marry Darcy, or she did get together with Darcy. Okay, so everything's fine. She's in love with Darcy now. Remember, she wasn't in love with Darcy?
Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, probably. It's actually the same movie. I don't know why the Brits keep making the same movie over and over and over again. Same story. As weird as that is.
I thought it was interesting when I first watched it. So.
What, Bridget Jones?
No, Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice, yeah, interesting movie. Yeah, but it's from like the 1830s or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's from the 1830s. Jane Austen wrote it way a long time ago.
And,
Longer.
The other one that I like is Sense and Sensibility.
I let her read it.
Sense and Sensibility?
I think it's what it's called. One of Jane Austen's other ones.
Yeah. My wife's gaga over that stuff. I know. Same story over and over again. Okay, do we have time? Yeah, what the hell. 43. Morality, religion, and justice. This is about religion. I get to talk about religion. I'm going to compare Protestantism with Judaism at some point. So if you don't understand who the Jewish people are, then this will be a really confusing conversation. If you don't understand why the guy went in to shoot all the old people in, I know, that's sad. Shot elders. Who does that? Who shoots elders? Right? I mean, some of them are as old as I am. That's really old. Why would you do that? Why would you hate somebody? It's like the guy going into the elementary school and shooting all the first graders. Who does that? What's going on in his head? I can understand shooting adults. I've shot at adults. That's not that big a deal. They shot back. Oh yeah, well, these guys were already shooting back. I was just shooting back at the guys who were shooting. Yeah, but those are adults. I can't imagine shooting an elder, or even thinking about hurting an elder, or shooting a baby. That kind of stuff. That's horrible.
They say why? It seems like everything.
He hates Jews. Hates Jews, wants them all to die. I'm sorry? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, big time.
Especially now, because a lot of it's seen as racism. A lot of it's just white power.
Right.
Especially with Trump president.
Yeah, but the administration doesn't want you to talk.
Okay, so we'll talk about it.
Oh, of course not. Why would we? I think Trump's right outside the door. He's listening to everything we say.
Are you relaying messages to Trump?
I was in the military once, so he's got a direct line to everything that I say. Yeah, this is really horrible. I mean, just really terrible, terrible stuff. But this has been going on forever. They exterminated, when they started exterminating Jewish people in the concentration camps during World War II, they didn't just kill the healthy ones. They didn't just kill the young ones. They killed all the babies. They killed everybody. They just tried to exterminate the entire race, as odd as that seems. How can people hate people like that? How can the hate be that great? If you want to kill off 8 million people, they only killed off 6 million people. Anyway, so we're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about morality and how horrible sometimes morality can be. Ethnocentrism leads people to assume that their own culture's ways are better or more natural than that of others. And of course, this is always the argument, was the Spanish culture so much superior to the Inca, to the Aztec, to all the individuals that they came in contact with? Was it so superior to that they should force people to change? That was the question. How about the English? The English did exactly the same thing. The French kind of did the same thing. The French were always after something a little bit different. Ethnocentrism allowed Europeans to force their understanding of morality, religion, and justice on all the indigenous people that they came across, all in the name of their definition of civilization. They considered their civilization superior. But if we look at the Americas, okay, we look at the Americas. If we look at Western civilization and American civilization, American indigenous civilization, which was superior? Who had the biggest cities? Were the biggest cities in Europe or were they in the Americas? Sorry? Yeah, Mexico City was much larger than any city in Europe. Cahokia, probably never heard of Cahokia, but it was a city right outside of St. Louis. They built a mound that was 100 feet high, and it was as large as a football field on top. Well, how did they do that? How do you build up something like that? Well, you take a basket full of dirt and you carry it to the top, and then you dump it on top. And they did that over and over and over again. They didn't have any ground-moving equipment. They had to pile it up. They had 30,000 people in that city. We can talk about the pyramids. What's the largest pyramid in the world? The Egyptian pyramid in Giza? No, it's down in South America. I know, now we're finding out new things about the Mayans. They built these huge temples. They built these huge pyramids right in the middle of the jungle. Where did they get the rocks? From miles and miles away. They transported them and they stacked these things up. And they built these huge pyramids. So which civilization was superior? The buildings that the Inca built down in Peru are still intact. The buildings that the Spanish built have been knocked down by earthquakes, but the Inca buildings are still intact, and it's because of the way that they put them together. They didn't use any cement. They used a lock and key system, and they also tilted all of their walls. Instead of having straight 90-degree walls, they were all angled walls. So when they had an earthquake, instead of it falling down, it just stays stable. Yeah, I know. It's really kind of interesting. So the Inca figured all this out a long time ago. So we can talk about ethnocentrism, we can talk about civilization, but the argument would have to be who had the better civilization. And potentially, of course, that argument would go to the people in the Americas, the indigenous people of the Americas. I need to stop right now, so I will.